Hello and welcome to Solar Insiders. I'm Sophie Vorrath, the editor of Renew Economy and One Step Off the Grid. And joining me again, back from her trip overseas, is Rachel Williamson, the potentially quite jet lagged Rachel Williamson.
Coming out of it now, thankfully. What is it? 5 days later. 4 days later.
Oh, God. It's a big trip. You were up to the continent.
Yes. And it's always worse coming back here. I
Yeah, it
find.
is for so many reasons. I mean, it's great to be home, but yeah,
Is it? Is
your
it?
holiday.
I could be on holiday forever.
Yeah. Yes, and honestly, you did come back to a bit of a stretch of a bit of a triumphant return of winter here in the south. I think we all got a bit excited and thought, "Oh, it's spring," and then no, not so much. But that's okay. We're sort of going to high five each other on the way through because I'm off away overseas next week. So yeah, I'm hoping for some warmer weather.
It will be wonderful.
Now, this week I had an interview with George Martin, who is the Chief Technology Officer for Plico Energy, which is the virtual power plant company with a virtual power plant in WA, based in WA and sort of born and bred there. And they're the only independent VPP offering in that state at the moment, which is, quite the situation to be in when there's a rebate, at least one of the rebates, it makes it mandatory to join a VPP. So it was really interesting speaking to George about, how it started and how different things are over on the WA grid and how the rebate is going over in the West. So what we will do is have a listen to the interview with George and then come back and discuss the news of the week. Here is George Martin, the CTO of Plico Energy. George Martin, welcome to Solar Insiders.
Thank you for having me, Sophie.
It is my pleasure. Now, we're here to talk about your company, Plico, which in my looking around yesterday, I discovered is from the Latin weave together, join together, link, which would be a reference to the fact that you guys are best known, I guess, for your VPP offering. And you're on top of that, the only independent approved VPP provider in the WA market at the moment, which is pretty huge, all things considered. We will get into that a bit later on, but I'd love to hear from you now about the origin story of Plico, Latin aside. And because, you started as the Dunsborough Community Energy Project, didn't you?
Yeah. So we started in Dunsborough in around 2017 or early 2018. And the idea by the folks that started it, Michael Cullen and Brian Innes, was to introduce a weekly model or improve access for solar and batteries in particular, because batteries, as you can imagine, back in 2017 or 18, they're not very popular.
At the very back of our minds.
Exactly. It was all about solar, and solar still plays a very, very important part. So they were thinking about how to start bringing batteries into the mainstream. And one of the key blockers back then was finance. It just cost too much. So they thought about introducing a weekly model, a weekly payment model, and wrapping around that a proposition that only a battery can offer. So blackout protection, energy independence, being able to lower your energy bills, and the flexibility that a VPP could provide. So the folks that took it up back then were also quite, I would say, forward thinking, because the VPP didn't really kick in until December 2022. But at least in that time, they were able to get the savings that the system offered them.
That's become really huge now because as we've seen more and more solar installed on rooftops, the value proposition has changed. It used to be that people could send a lot of it to the grid and that would still be a great return on their investment. That is no longer the case. And, for instance, in Victoria, we've got, I think, 0.1 cent of a kilowatt. Yeah, yeah.
Less than half a cent now.
Yeah, for our feed-in tariff. So, and that's just the way it is, because when we're generating all that solar during the day, the grid just doesn't need it anymore. And the emphasis now is on using all of that solar, which is really where the value proposition has always lied, but it hasn't been, I suppose, practical. And batteries is what turns that around. Tell us a bit about WA, because WA is really, again, unique in Australia. It's this isolated grid. You've got the Southwest Interconnected System there, which really has had to face a lot of the problems we're facing in Australia pretty early and pretty rapidly.
Yeah, so definitely unique. So it comes down to the energy market structure. I won't get too deep into that, but basically the NEM, or the National Electricity Market, comprising all the Maine and Tasmania states, with the exception of Northern Territory and WA, that's an energy only market. So that market, or basically you only trade energy there. You don't trade necessarily megawatts, you trade megawatt hours. And therefore the cost of energy on the spot market in the NEM can range in the negative, close to $2,000 now per megawatt hour, all the way to, it's getting close to $20,000 per megawatt hour. In the West, it's not an energy only market, it's a capacity market. So they put value on megawatts and less emphasis on megawatt hours. And therefore, they don't have a spot market per se. It's called the balancing market. And the price on that balancing market tops out at around $750, around about now, $750 per megawatt hour, as opposed to close to 20,000 in the NEM.
Seems a lot more reasonable.
Yes, but where they underpin that is in capacity payments. So they pay generators for having megawatts available if and when it's needed. So that's one of the key differences.
Which would stop some of the gaming that we see a bit on the NEM. Is that right? Like,
it stops bidding gaming, yes. But everything has its pros and cons. Like for one, so we've got gaming against the NEM, but what we've got against going for the NEM is, if the generator isn't doing anything, they're not getting paid. If they're not supplying energy to the grid, they're not getting paid. You've kind of resolved the gaming issue in the West, or in the Swiss at least, but then you have generators who can be on standby for quite a large portion of the year, getting paid for it without actually delivering megawatt hours. So certainly pros and cons. On balance, when you look at investment signals, generally you'd prefer a capacity market, because you can at least put a dollar value on the megawatt. Whereas in the East, you kind of, you rely a bit, you rely on forecasting where the spot price is going to be at the time, and volatility, et cetera. So, and
it feels like the West is a bit more suited to where we're headed, doesn't it? Like, it's a little bit more suited to the kind of market that's evolving.
Which is why the federal government tried to tackle that by introducing the capacity investment scheme in the East, and also in the West. But that's a way to underpin investment without necessarily purely relying on the volatility of the market. Again, very simplistic terms, but that's the gist of it. So, and with the Swiss, so WA is split into two main grids: the Southwest Interconnected System, which is the Perth area and down to Dunsborough, and probably a bit more south to Kalbarri and north. And then there's the Northwest Interconnected System. That one is the one run by Horizon as both DNSP and the retailer.
Yeah, and the consequence of the way it's run, and the fact that these the big gentailers there are state owned. So you've got Horizon and you've got Western Power, and Synergy. that sort of has, it has its benefits insofar as there can be some pretty quick innovation because they're driving it, the government's driving it, and they can just make those calls a bit easier. But on the other hand, it stifles competition a little bit, perhaps. And certainly that's been one of the concerns with the introduction of the federal battery rebate and the stacking of the scheme. And I'm getting ahead of myself a bit here because we probably have to explain that quickly, which honestly, I'm going to be very frank and say I have gotten so many things wrong about this battery rebate along the way. I've adjusted them, but
Which one, the WA or the federal or both?
all of them, the New South Wales, not the federal so much because that was pretty clear from the get-go. But just once the states announced their iterations, it was a bit more complicated. And I think with WA, I thought that you could only get the rebate if you got the stacked one, but you can actually do only the federal, but it's just less money. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yes.
So people can choose to do it without signing up to a VPP, but
Yes.
it's not as generous, and arguably in WA they might struggle to make as big a return on investment.
Yes and no. So there's a lot to unpack there.
So that you can see how that was my very poor.
Allow me to start with where it started and where it's kind of ended up, because it helps it contextualize why we are where we are. So in February, as an election promise, the WA Labor government, ahead of an election, announced what was at the time the most generous battery subsidy in the nation. Excellent. What they had announced then was a $5,000 rebate, but a bit more granular, priced at $500 per kilowatt hour, up to a maximum of 10 kilowatt hours.
Which compares to $300 a kilowatt hour federally.
Yeah, 350, 360, 360. Yeah. So that was announced obviously before the federal government. Again, they're all announced in election cycles. So they were voted back in, and then they started working on implementing what that policy is going to look like. In between, while they're working on it, the federal government announced the Cheaper Homes program as an election promise. They won. So how the federal government pitched it was, it will save you 30% of the cost of the battery. Now, that 30% isn't necessarily off the cost of the battery itself. It's actually probably more. That's probably where they got the 30% might have been like the total installed cost of battery. So then in a bit of a scramble, we had the states who currently offer rebates being, or in progress, being WA and New South Wales, trying to work in, all right, what do we do with this new federal rebate that's about introduced? So the WA, and I'll focus on WA because obviously that's where we are and focusing at the moment. New South Wales coming soon. But they went back and had a look at how best it can be stacked. And maybe a key point as well is that when it was announced initially at $500 per kilowatt hour as a state rebate, it was up to 20,000 rebates. Yes. So they went back and they revised it down from $500 per kilowatt hour at a state level to about $130 per kilowatt hour, which when then coupled with the federal rebate gives you almost $5,000 off on a 10 kilowatt hour battery. And the state rebate also tops out at 10 kilowatt hours, whereas the federal tops out at 50 kilowatt hours. What came with that was, instead of at the start, the policy position was you get $5,000 state rebate and the battery needed to be VPP compatible. It then became, it needs to be in a VPP. So the VPP then became mandatory. And what was actually also announced, which we kind of see a lot of our customers wanting or gravitating towards almost more than the $1,300, Sophie, is the $10,000 interest-free loan. Yes, that is excellent. that is an excellent deal. So yeah, the nuance there is, in order to get,
And that's,
the
sorry, that
loan-
was on the state side, wasn't it?
yeah, that was on the
yeah,
state side, yes. WA. So in order to get access to that loan, you need to take up the rebate. So you can't take up the loan without the rebate, and therefore you need to be eligible for the rebate. You need to take up the VPP and then get access to the loans, provided you also meet the eligibility criteria for the loan.
Yeah. So it's a pretty sweet deal, but I think people were, it was a bit of crankiness. I mean, and that's New South Wales and WA, because I think the feeling was, oh, it's going to be stacked on and it'll be this huge discount. But I think quite wisely, these state governments decided, no, rather than making it huge, we'll make it go further, and we'll make,
To that point, it went from 20,000 to 100,000 rebates.
yes, yeah. So that sort of, and the point that WA Energy Minister made, I think last week in Parliament, was that, if it was $20,000 rebates available, that would be pretty much done by the end of this year. So that's now extended by 5 times, and which I think is a great thing. On the VPP side, I think people, Australians love being told what to do with their assets in particular. But again, it's such an interesting topic. Like, I think that it's one of those things that possibly we haven't communicated very well. I'm talking the whole industry here, media included. What is a VPP? I think people understand, but there's not a lot of understanding that there are quite a lot of offers out there, and they can be quite, they can be a bit flexible. Some can't, some can, So I think it's really interesting, and I think for this reason, WA it's a really interesting test case, because there was this really generous offer for people who have to sign up to a VPP. It's really incumbent upon the state utilities and you guys to make it work, because I think there's a 2-year window that you have to be in there. Is that right?
The city year.
Yeah. Okay. And so for them in particular, it's like, if they don't get it right, people will just be flocking out in 2 years' time, which will be really right when they need people to stay in the VPP. So I think moving on to sort of that subject more closely now, can I get you to just give us for want of a better word, elevator pitch of what a VPP does and why it's important, particularly in a grid like WA?
Okay. The VPP is it stands for virtual power plant, and it is a collection of solar and battery systems and potentially other assets that consume energy in people's homes that are coordinated centrally to achieve a better for all outcome on the energy market, in very simple terms, and then the customers for whose assets are used, they are financially rewarded for their contribution.
Sorry, I was going to say, I think one of the messages that I think there's been a bit of confusion over, or I guess lack of clarity, is that I think a lot of the time when you hear from the AEMO, the market operator, or from governments, they talk about how important VPPs are for the broader grid and for integrating all of our solar, which is true. But it sort of makes it sound like it's there's not much in it for the consumer, but that's not necessarily the case, is it?
There is definitely something in it for the consumer. There is no way known that this thing would be even remotely what it is today, and it's still in its infancy today, that if there wasn't something in it for the consumer. We're going to kind of go back to before decentralization of energy generation and think about all the coal and all the gas that was there before, and it still is there, and that was all controlled centrally. to make sure that the grid needs to be in equilibrium all the time, at any one time. If for folks that may be listening that may not be familiar, but if the light is flickering at your house, that's because there is slight deviation from that equilibrium in the grid. So, and then not to mention blackouts, but the lights flickering is at least something that people notice as well, on top of blackouts, and not as bad. So now that we're moving into a world where we've got generation assets in millions of other places, it is important to, in as much as it was important to coordinate it before when they were big power plants, it is still important to try at least to coordinate as much of those assets as possible for the greater good.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think, when the solar journey started off, the rooftop solar journey in Australia, I don't think, people weren't sort of thinking to this point at the very start. It was just all about cutting your bills and let's get some on. And it was good for the grid in that it, reduced prices during the middle of the day. It shifted the load. But we're now at a point where, as you say, it's sending prices into the negative. We're seeing many incidences of negative demand, which is a whole new headache for the grid operator. That obviously it comes from a great place and from people being proactive and environmentally conscious. But yes, it has to be sorted, and there are lots of different ways, and VPPs are one of them. But let's hear now about Plico's offering. How does someone join up? Do you have to have your own solar already? Can it be any battery? Talk us through that side of it.
Sure. So I'll start with the core proposition, which is it's zero upfront or very little upfront, depending on your house. The solar and battery are installed at your house, and it's paid back through weekly repayments, financed essentially. And the idea is those weekly repayments or monthly repayments, depending on whatever the customer chooses, are less than what that customer would have otherwise paid for electricity from the grid. So there should be savings from the get-go.
Instantly, yeah.
Yes. Not rivers of gold.
No.
Like I'm not
No one's retiring and putting
yes,
their
but it's a saving. It's certainly a saving. It probably runs into a few $100s a year discrepancy between what you would have otherwise paid for the energy from the grid versus what you're paying for the system.
And I assume it's steady, so you're not having that situation of having one month a really low bill and the next month a huge one. It's
definitely steady,
which is very underrated.
yeah these days. And the system comes with blackout protection, and it comes with access to the VPP from the start. So and that's probably one of the key things, is that the customer journey with us starts with that whole message and the VPP from the very start, from the very beginning. One of the reasons, or one of the observations we've seen about just general VPP uptake and feedback, and where it has done more harm than good, at least from a customer perspective, is that if someone's invested maybe pre the rebates or post the rebates $20,000 upfront in their solar and battery system, and then someone comes up to them with a VPP offer and says you'll get about $100 a year if you join the VPP. What's $100 a year? But for someone who's able to pay that $20,000 upfront, it's relative to the investment. It's not something that would generally get their attention as much as you would hope. And therefore those folks would be in that hands off my asset bucket. Whereas, and you will notice that there are other models out there about getting the VPP proposition in with the customer at the start of their DER/CER journey. And that way, the message is you're already saving money by having the system installed on this finance plan with us. On top of that, you could save more, or we will pay you more, up to $100 or $200 or whatever it may be, depending how many activations we've got in the 1 year, on top of the few $100s you're already saving. Suddenly, the conversation is a bit more palatable in terms of how much this whole thing is worth, because it's packaged up, rather than it just being a standalone, bring your own battery to us and you'll get $100 a year. So that's been key to us. We don't have that many customers that bring their own assets that they've already paid for into our VPP. We do have a few, but having said that, Sophie, we haven't also gone out and pursued that particular proposition with full force yet.
Right. And you've been more targeting the people who want to get started but just haven't got the capital.
Correct. So that's how we've been doing it, and we've had to tweak the VPP proposition over time as well, rightly or wrongly. It's I mean, you could say it needs to be consistent so people get it, but if we got it wrong from the start, then we need to tweak it. So
Yeah.
we
Oh,
have
absolutely.
and again, it's been a double-edged sword, but we have tweaked it over time, and we've tried to position it more of a, if you are activated, then you get paid like a super feed-in tariff or a VPP feed-in tariff, because people that have got solar can generally refer or relate to feed-in tariffs, whether they like them or not. Like, it's too low. It's usually a pain point for people that the feed-in tariff is too low. So we can kind of utilize that existing knowledge for customers of what a feed-in tariff is and say that in the VPP, when there's a VPP activation with feeding in energy from your battery to the grid, that will be subject to a really high feed-in tariff. And we've found that lands a lot better.
Yeah, that's really interesting, using the language that they know and that they're sort of already has a positive, well, used to have a positive connotation.
Because for me, that's the customers and the people in Australia are that's the key. The technology is there. The technology is there. We need to take the focus off the technology. Like, all the work at the moment now that's happening in industry is about interoperability, standardization, etc., etc. There isn't necessarily work happening out there about, can we do this? The answer is we can. Whilst there's all this work happening about interoperability and standardization, which is necessary, we're shifting the focus, at least internally, on language.
Yes. Can we get consumer buy-in, and can people understand it sufficiently that they realize that, the benefits, and that they don't feel suspicious? I think that's the problem. There's this sort of lingering suspicion from people, and I guess it rooted in mistrust, that is probably deep-seated, because the industry hasn't always acted honorably in these matters. But yes, I think that's been super important. And I know that a couple of the panels I've seen that have talked about VPPs have all said the same thing about the fact that they've had to keep fine-tuning the whole way, because really, it's this whole we're building the plane while we're flying it thing. And in that way, I think it's valuable for the consumers, because you're making them part of it. You're using their feedback to say, okay, well, this isn't working. Even if we think this is good, it's not hitting with the customers, so let's fix it. So I think that's a really positive message. Even though it might look like, we got it wrong, it's like, well, we're on the cutting edge here, so let's keep fine-tuning. Let's get it where it needs to be.
We have to. And the other thing is, there's lots of different VPP offers out there, especially in the East. Not so much in the West, but in the East, there's lots. And they're all pitched differently.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, it's the prerogative of the company doing that, of course. There's nothing bad or illegal about that. But it's like ones, there are ones that offer fixed, like a fixed monthly bonus, $15 or something. There's ones that offer yearly and they pay it quarterly. And there are ones that offer as a, like us, like a feed-in tariff when and if something actually happens. And I guess that also comes down to what value each one of those companies that's offering the VPP can extract out of it. So if you're a retailer, you can probably get more value from a VPP than we can, for example, because we are not a retailer, an energy retailer, and therefore we're not exposed to the spot market in the East. So there's slightly less, at least for now, value that we, without having a retail license, can extract. And therefore, again, why for us it becomes a whole of customer proposition rather than just the narrow VPP proposition.
And speaking of that, of your, where you're placed in WA and how you're basically one of 3 VPP offers, and really when you break it down, one of 2 because on the Swiss. Do you think that's been an advantage for you guys at all, or a disadvantage? Like I suppose it would be a bit of both.
It's a bit of both. It's an advantage because we've been the first mover. That's clear, and it's a disadvantage also because we've been the first mover. Because then the frameworks for the industry in WA to engage with an aggregator like us aren't set in stone yet. Hopefully they will be soon, but that means over the last few years, we've also been at an industry level and working with industry bodies, just feeling out how this engagement is supposed to work. The key there is that also differs from the NEM is that Synergy was anointed as the aggregator of aggregators, and therefore for non-contestable customers, so for residential customers. So for any party that is aggregating residential customers in the Swiss to offer that up for any VPP contract, be it directly to Synergy or to AEMO or to Western Power, it needs to go through Synergy as into the parent aggregator. Again, positives and negatives, just like with everything. And hopefully we can continue to work together as an industry to best realize what potential could lie there.
Yeah, it must be a very, very interesting time for your company right now.
That's very good.
Yeah. So since the launch of the federal rebate, and I guess the WA one at the same time, how has business been for you guys?
It's exploded. We're getting about 5 or 6-fold the number of contracts we were before these announcements, which is fantastic. We're not celebrating that yet, though. The reason is we've got a backlog of contracts that, because basically since at least in WA, since the election promise was announced in February, we went from selling batteries to selling nothing for 5 months almost.
Selling the promise.
Yeah. So and we've always had to be really careful about how we contract with customers and give them a way out, because the regulations were still kind of, or the rebates were still being cooked up essentially. So when we would, for example, take a regular customer who's buying solar and battery to begin with, we contracted with that customer, say early March. All it was $5,000 off because it was the state rebate. Cool, we've got the contract. With caveats, obviously, and allowing the customer to leave it without penalty if the rebate changes or if there are other changes as a result of the regulations. That customers then got wind of, obviously, as a whole industry, of the Cheaper Homes program. We've gone back to revise that contract for that customer. We've then said, okay, $5,000 WA rebate, plus, depending on the size of the battery, call it $3,500 federal rebate. Here is your new contract. A few months later, the WA rebate gets revised down from 5,000 so we've had to go back to that same customer. And this time it wasn't as good of a conversation as
No, I was going to say, by this stage, the customer's going, what the bloody hell?
yeah. So believe me when I say, like, doing the right thing on this kind of stuff is really expensive, but you got to do it. So a lot of the contracts that are now kind of getting installed have gone through 3 different iterations, 3 different admin, 3 different sets of overhead. Hopefully we're kind of getting through that and then kind of settling into a new BAU and celebrating what is some seriously awesome policies at state and federal level, both in WA and New South Wales.
Well, it's great that you still think they're seriously awesome after having to go through all those.
Yeah, I mean, everything goes through the sausage machine, right? But yeah, that on balance, obviously they're really good.
Yeah. And so how big is your VPP these days?
It's growing daily, but it's at about 3,100 systems. So that's close to a 33 megawatt hour battery.
Wow,
altogether.
that's great.
Yeah, it's pretty decent. It's now the size of one big battery.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And moving forward, you know, how big do you see this growing? And do you think that this has really like changed the game? Do you think now people are going to start thinking of solar and batteries from the get-go, maybe even EVs, electrification? Are we at that point?
I sure hope so. I mean, even at, my son's soccer training yesterday, folks are coming up to me and for the very first time asking about batteries. People would be asking me about solar, and before all the rebates, they'd be asking me, are batteries worth it? And I'd have to go through the whole spiel. Now they're like, where can I get one? So yeah, it's great. It's fantastic. And again, more storage in the grid is great. More storage in the grid is fantastic.
And it's great for everyone.
Yeah.
That's one really good message, is that it really will help start pushing prices down, which is, all everyone's been talking about for the whole time.
Especially also for the individuals that take it up. I mean, the additional storage will have a net benefit to folks that even don't have solar and battery, by hopefully reducing network investment, even reducing the amount of energy that a retailer would need to hedge against for the evening peak, because now there's lots of more storage in it that kicks in at residential level at night. But you hope that all of that stuff makes a big difference. I think it certainly lends itself to, we really need to get the trust piece as good as we possibly can. And I'll give you an example, actually, because for us, when we first, that very first VPP contract that we got in December 22, we had to send out lots of comms, because for folks that have taken up systems with us since early 2018, no VPP, right? So we've had to send out lots of comms to bring people back up to speed on what's going on there. The feedback coming back from that was fascinating, from folks who were, this is why I signed up to Plico, to why is my system being used for the benefit of others, and why am I paying for that? So that the full spectrum. We would reach out to almost, at the time we didn't have, we had probably 1,000 folks, so we could probably try and reach out to as many people who actually gave us direct feedback as possible. And especially the detractors, let's say, who said either, how can this possibly make a dent in what's going on in the grid, or why am I paying for the others' benefit? One, we explained obviously that it's greater than the sum of its parts when it's all coming together. And then for the folks who were more concerned about their own financial well-being as a result of being in it, they took a little bit of time for us to explain to them, actually, you are helping and you're actually financially better off. And one of the key indicators we noticed over the year, this took years, was that very first time we activated the VPP, as well as probably a year and a half into it, we would put out Facebook messages. We would send out SMSs, 3 SMSs. Hey, there's a VPP event coming later today. Hey, it's started. Hey, it's ended. And we would also send emails. So we probably overdid it on all the communication. Probably did that for a good year and a half. Over time, we started getting lots of feedback. And mind you, like, we did that, and then we delivered, and then we paid. So people saw money going into their accounts. Over time, we started getting lots of feedback saying, stop telling me when
Stop,
it's being
stop
active.
spamming me.
Just
Really?
just do it. Like, you don't need to tell me anymore.
Okay,
Just
that's
do
really
it.
interesting.
It was really eye-opening, because we went from, like, anytime we're touching a customer's asset, or the asset that's in the customer's house, we should probably tell them and let them know what's happening, et cetera, et cetera. So we went from, like, having those 3 modes of communication whenever we touch the battery, down to emails and SMS, still 3 emails and 3 SMSs, down to 3 SMSs, and then down to 1 SMS. And we got to the point where they were still telling us, like, why are you texting? So we changed. We then put out comms after that VPP season. That was maybe 23, 24. We put out comms and said, okay, it's going to be opt-in. If you want to opt in to receiving these notifications, you're more than welcome. And we also then decided that on our website, when the VPP is activated, we'll put up a banner on the website rather than email and send text messages and that. So we went from needing to text, around that time was probably 2,000 customers. We had about only 50 opt-in
Really?
to the SMS. Yeah. And so that took time, because at least those that have been with us for a number of years saw that whenever we did something, we paid. Whenever we did something, we paid. And the payment was as we said it was going to be. So that's been eye-opening for us. And I do share that quite widely, because it's in everyone's interest in the whole industry, not just us, that people understand and have a level of trust in VPPs. It's on all of us to make sure that happens. But yeah, it was quite fascinating.
It is. And what about the side that, obviously, that probably the most important thing is that they're seeing that they're being rewarded for it. But what about on the side of the sort of your battery's capacity and the assets being used and stuff? Are people worried about that? Are they worried that, they'll go to want to use their battery for something later and it's only at 10% or something? Is that something people are worried about?
We've had probably a few, like probably less than 5 people kind of come back and say, well, now my battery's at 20%, 30%, 10%. What now? Well, firstly, the good thing is you don't necessarily have to worry about your battery capacity, because as part of the VPP, as well as other mechanisms out there, we helped relieve pressure on the grid. So the bigger picture is it's increasing grid reliability. The second one is, well, yes, at this point in time, your battery is 10, 20%, and you will have to use from the grid. However, we've just paid you 3 times what you would have saved by utilizing that 10 kilowatt hours during the night. We've taken it, but we've given you 3 times its value. So you are financially better off. Again, those are nuanced conversations, though, like, because its value, someone says, or someone sees that it's gone down to 10 or 20%. But again, those tend to be our newer members. Older ones know the drill.
Yeah, well, that's it. I suppose that if they've been there for 2 years or whatever, they just know that it's never been a problem. So I guess they just don't need to think about it. Whereas at the start, you sort of thinking, whoa, this has happened. And I know that, just even for me, when I first got my solar, I was obsessed with looking at the app and seeing and I don't really look at it anymore. You just kind of know, when you'll be generating, and yeah. But yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, I think all of these things are so fascinating, and it's really goes to show that we often make assumptions about what consumers will think or how they'll feel, and they're quite often wrong. And yeah, it really pays to just listen and have this feedback loop.
again, I see this as the single biggest opportunity, let's call it, rather than just focusing on the technical of the whole thing. Because I think the technical, you can get some people together in a room and everything gets resolved. But this is much bigger. Eventually this will be millions of people. Millions of households, and 2 to 3 people a household. That's a lot. So, yeah.
Well, good on you for forging a path. Now, if I was a good podcaster, I would finish it there because that's such an interesting and fabulous message. But it would be remiss of me not to ask you about the technology quickly. You did mention that you provide backup. Do you use mostly the same batteries and solar panels?
Yeah. So we try and keep it as harmonious as possible in a fleet. So we currently use Alpha ESS, and we also introduced SIG Energy. When we install or decide to sell these systems, they go through some serious checking in terms of not just for safety, quality, etc., but can we do what we need to do for the purposes of the VPP with this system, because they're not all equal on that front. And yeah, that's been key. And also in blackout protection, that's kind of also picking up in terms of people want. Usually, historically, it's been you can back up some circuits, not all of them, not your entire house. Now we're moving towards technology that can back up your entire house. And Tesla was probably the only one on the market for quite a while that could do that. Now there are others, which is great, and probably comes at the right time too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, George, thank you so much for your time. I've eaten right into your day here, but it's a fascinating subject, and we shall keep watching and check back in with you very soon. But for today, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Sophie. It was an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Bye now. Now, Rachel, the news of the week. You're obviously playing catch up. I'm just assuming you weren't obsessing over batteries and solar panels while you were in Venice.
There are no signs of rooftop solar in Venice. I can confirm this.
No solar gondolas or anything like that?
None of that. None in Switzerland either, although they do like to cover their cow sheds with huge, the biggest arrays I've ever seen. Just extraordinary.
That's
a whole
fantastic.
roof of solar. Yeah, I took some pictures. I'll send them.
Excellent. We'll have to have some Swiss solar cow sheds. You do think of cows when you think of Switzerland somehow with the bells, and it's very good to hear that they're being solar powered. So this week, I guess we've had a bit of the 2 bits of news I can think of that I sort of started the week with were the data on the latest rooftop solar installs and battery installs around the country from SunWiz. And the interesting thing there is that while batteries are obviously going gangbusters, we're still averaging 1,000 a day installations, which is really extraordinary. It's having a bit of a equal and opposite impact on solar, which everyone was sort of expecting. I think that it might give it a bit of a boost because people would retrofit and people who haven't installed anything would seize this opportunity, but that's not playing out in the data just yet. Obviously, it's very early days. But what was really interesting is this tiny little segment, which is like the 0 to 2.5 kilowatts, had a little spike. So there probably are some people who are adding, a little bit more solar while they're installing their battery just to, I guess, make the most of it. Because we know that they're installing big batteries. I think the average at the moment is about 30 kilowatt hours, which is really huge for a house. Yeah, I know. I'd like to know what these people are doing. But, I think it's this messaging that, you need to sort of upsize and with electrification and EVs and all of that. Why not?
Australia is the land of the big things.
Yes, it is.
You
Big
got the
pineapple,
big
big
banana.
merino. Yep.
Big batteries.
Big batteries. Why not? Why not?
Do we know why? Is there speculation yet why the the solar installs have dropped.
Well, what Warwick Johnson says in his analysis is just, that I think basically it's all hands on deck for the batteries, and that's with the retailers as well, because the interest's there and because this is a real moment to sort of just, yeah. And I think also there's a bit of playing catch up on the installs because, we had the announcement in, what was it, March, that they were going to introduce it. And then when they won the election in May, they said they were going to bring it in, and then they brought it in July. So we had this sort of build up, and I think a lot of people, once they knew that it was coming in, didn't connect their batteries. So yeah, there's been this sort of backlog. I think people are playing catch up. I think probably households are also focusing on batteries, and it's possible that it's mostly at the moment the households that have decent and probably relatively new solar systems. I don't know. It's really interesting, but I think one of the segments that was doing okay, or one of the solar retailers that was doing okay was this one that works with new build housing projects. So that was really interesting, and that might be somewhere where it starts to build, and that's really good to see because it wasn't that long ago that we were still seeing, housing projects built and they still weren't putting solar on the roofs, which is to me extraordinary. So, interesting. I think it might, obviously it's such early days, but it'd be very interesting to see how these all sort of balance out and yeah, what patterns we start to see emerge.
I'm interested to see how this is going to affect, a lot of people buying big batteries are buying them not to power their home or their car. They're buying them so they can trade, usually through the likes of Amber. So I'm interested to see what impact this will actually have on those peak and off-peak energy flows and what that's actually going to do to wholesale market prices. Because then you've got so many of these, they are little batteries compared to, grid scale ones. But as we're seeing with rooftop solar, it's going to have an effect.
Yeah, absolutely. Like if that starts then soaking up all of this solar that we've seen coming onto the grid in the middle of the day, that's going to be another, as I think Giles wrote a story not that long ago, it's going to be another big change. And, it will once again require a rethink. And it's really interesting you say that because George from Plico was saying that what they've found resonates with the customers as far as getting them on board with VPPs has been talking in terms of, like, they've sort of described any revenue that they might be able to make from this trading as tariff, like, because people for so long associated getting solar with having these generous feed-in tariffs, and that would be where they made a lot of the return on investment, but that is really gone now. And so, yeah, he said sort of speaking in that language is something that people really understand and really want to get on board. So it is interesting to see that is a big part of what people are thinking, getting batteries.
Yeah, I guess what I'm thinking is, how long is it going to be before it's not economic anymore in terms of wholesale market trading to get such a huge battery?
Oh, look, I think behind it all, and this is the good thing about the battery, is that behind it all, at the very bottom line, it's all about solar self-consumption, right? And I think that if you can't do all of that, then trading it's fantastic. And if if you're a household with just one couple and you're not using all that much power, then that will be important. But if you're a family and you've got all electric household, I don't think it'll be that important anymore. As far it still will be there, but I think underneath it all, setting up these households so that they can be self-sufficient, so that there's backup if there's any emergencies. I think that's the core principle underlying it all, and throwing in the smart management of households when people aren't using their solar or whatever is a bonus for the households, and it's definitely a bonus for the grid, because having all those households unchecked, not great. Yeah, I don't know. That's my 2 bobs worth anyway. We also had another call this week from the Smart Energy Council. They've taken a little, I shouldn't say little, it sounds like I'm undermining it, a very powerful little delegation to Canberra to petition directly the Environment Minister and the Treasurer about the importance of getting this national mandatory solar stewardship scheme underway, and talking about it being, hugely important, not just in terms of the huge amount of panel waste that we're starting to accrue, but because there's these companies that have been preparing for it, and they're currently going, well, where's our market? Please, can we start working? So, yes, that was another really interesting thing. And then we've also had a big week of approvals, Rach. Maybe you can talk a bit about that. And this is in the big side of town.
And in the windy side of town as well. It's not
The wind,
so
yes.
much. The solar, Ace in Australia had a big 7 days because they got their very contentious Robbins Island wind project approved, the final approval from the feds. And then today they got Valley of the Winds in New South Wales. So both of those have,
Which is really big as well. That's 900 megawatts, isn't it?
977, I think, with a battery. But they are still facing a hurdle in that they're still facing a lawsuit from
From a bailiff.
a bailiff, yeah, who doesn't like the fact that it is right next to a farm that he owns, which he bought in 2017, I think, purely to keep it in the family for 20 million. But one of the big fires in New South Wales took out the historic homestead there. And he says, I think about a year or 2 later, and he says he's still planning to rebuild it, but hasn't gotten around to it in the last 8 or 9 years. So
it looks a little bit like one of these phantom dwellings, but then again, if there was a house there, that makes it less dubious. I don't know. There are a couple of very big projects, and it's yeah, I wonder how many of these sort of really huge wind projects we'll see in New South Wales going forward. It just seems to be very big and hard to get approved.
yeah, but they've got it through, which is,
I mean, the Tassie one still needs Tassie environmental approval, I think, the Robbins Island. But you'd have to think that that's by the by if the feds have approved it.
yeah.
And it's interesting the conditions that they approved for Robbins Island, because there was mention of turbine shutdowns and other things.
You have to think that where it is, turbine shutdowns, now that turbine shutdowns have been proved to work in other Tasmanian wind farms,
yes,
actually
at
Cattle Hill, mostly Cattle Hill, and I think there's another one. Now that that's been proved to work, you've got to think that they're going to be shutting those turbines down every time they spot anything that looks even vaguely like an orange-bellied parrot, because
and they have to do a 3-year study before they start construction. So there are a lot of hefty conditions that I think ACEN is still making its way through, obviously. And it'd just be interesting to see, because the last time they were told that they'd have to shut the turbines down, they challenged the decision.
for 5 months of the year. Not just when you see a bird, just for an entire 5-month block.
For the nesting season, wasn't it? So, yeah, I can't see... Yeah, it will be very interesting to see what the bird and bat survey comes up with.
And it's a fascinating project too, because it's not like your regular wind farm where you just build your wind farm. They've also got to build, I saw your story, it said 4 quarries, a bridge, a port. There's a huge amount of extra infrastructure that actually needs to be built to support that wind farm. And, as a few of the opponents say, Marinus Link is not big enough to take all of that energy to the mainland.
Not stage 1 anyway.
Yeah. not stage one. And like, what are they going to do with it? What they, is Tasmania finally going to turn into this economic energy using powerhouse that they've been trying to do for a long time? Or what do you
It is, as you said, still very contentious. And I think, Marinus, that's another one that just got approval as well. And I think the concern in Tassie was that once Marinus got approved, it would be open further for all these huge projects, and they're going to feel justified in that fear now with Robbins Island being approved not long after. So yeah, we'll have to wait and see how all of this unfolds, and yeah, we'll see. I'd be very interested to see what ACEN make of all of the conditions, is what I will say. And in Queensland, it's not been so fortunate.
It is the
for the wind
opposite
developers.
situation, you could say.
Opposite land up in the north.
Yeah. They the Queensland government has cancelled another wind farm. This time, one that was supposed to go in a pine forest. So monoculture, native bush is not there. No native animals there. Everyone's saying this is the perfect spot for a wind farm. It's not even close to people. But the government, it hasn't put a wrecking ball through its state planning processes yet. So the planning approval for that project still stands. But what it's done instead is repeal the law that would allow state forests to also host other projects.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and so that has basically ended that project. Even though the proponents are saying, look, when the vibe shifts, we will try again. So that's still hopeful, but it's when you start counting up all of the things that Queensland has had a hand in cancelling just this year, it adds up to a very bad picture. And
it does, and it sends a very, unwelcoming message to developers and investors.
Yeah, like the investors I spoke to yesterday were not willing to go so far as to say we're out, we're done. Still trying to present a hopeful cooperative front, but it's hard to see how you're going to convince private money to go to Queensland now when you just don't know whether your project will last the distance.
Yeah, and to get all of that way through and to have your planning approval and everything, and to have it uprooted at that stage is really diabolical, because that's a lot of money already sunk and a lot of time, and it really sort of makes it seem a bit Wild Westish, that the rules are kind of open. So yes, very concerning up there. Well, I reckon that's about it for this week. It's lovely to have you back,
Oh, thank you,
Rachel.
sir. It's lovely to be. It is lovely to be
Yeah.
back, even though finishing the summer and you're
Yeah, a
would
bit
be.
devastating. Yeah. Oh dear. Well, I have to tell you, and I had to do the top and tail by myself last time. I'm not even going to tell you how many takes it took without you there to hold my hand. So I'm very grateful that you're back. But I will not be here for a little while now. I will be back in sort of mid-October. So until then, I will say thank you very much to all the listeners. Thank you to our sponsor Pylon, and to our readers as well across all of the websites. Thank you. We will see you in a few weeks' time, but perhaps Rachel will take the reins while I'm gone. Perhaps. Alrighty, bye now.